Alright, welcome to your Algebra 3 final review videos. We're doing numbers 42 and 43 to get ready for your Try 1 final review. Well, final. This is the review, so hopefully you're ready for that. For 42, we're going to simplify the number using the imaginary unit I. For this one, we have the square root of negative 144. So what we're going to do for this, first things first, we need to get rid of that negative underneath. Remember, if we have I, the square root of negative 1 is the same as I, or I squared is the same as negative 1. Now, I can simplify 144. That's the same as the square root of negative 1 times 144. And then because I have that, we have square root of negative 1, square root 144. I can break it apart. Now, we already wrote up here the square root of negative 1 is I, so I'm going to have an I out front. And then the square root of 144 is actually 12. It's a perfect square, so we have I times 12. I would rewrite that as 12I, and that would be your final answer. One thing to be careful of, and I've seen people doing this as they do their homework for this section, 144 is a perfect square. I don't have to break it apart. I don't have to find numbers that go into it. It's a perfect square. So I can just take the square root and write that number in front of I. All right, our next one, we have the square root of negative 360. This guy, again, is the square root of negative 1 and the square root of 360. Remember, the square root of negative 1 gives me my I, so I have I root 360. Now from here, I'm trying to find a perfect square that goes into 360. The first one that comes to mind for me is 36. So I know I, and then we have the square root of 36 times 10. I can break that apart, so I have I times the square root of 36 times the square root of 10. Remember in my last step, mostly what I'm doing is I'm trying to find two numbers that when I multiply them together, they give me the other one. Now if I simplify, the square root of 36 is 6, so I have 6I root 10. And this should be our final answer. If you want to check, you can look for a perfect square that goes into 10. I can divide 10 by 5, which isn't a perfect square. I can divide it by 2. I can also divide by 10 and 1. None of those are perfect squares, so this is my answer. I'm all done.